She said, what a fanciful and whimsical necromancer. I love the colors. And then she posted these adorable dragon gifts.
Aw, that's amazing.
She's trying.
Yeah.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. Probably a necromancer, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Sometimes it's hard to raise a family, you know?
I raise a family when you can raise a family.
My mom thought D&D was demon worshipping for the longest time. So
Look,
Yes.
we'll take the
not
win.
quite as supportive.
How many people had their books taken away by their parents?
I just didn't tell my mom I played D&D. So she never found out when I was a teenager.
Just didn't come up. Good
Yeah. She found out later, after she couldn't tell me.
How many people had clever hiding places for their D&D books?
Nice.
Right next to those other books.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this inconveniently timed 5 o'clock panel on dungeon mastering tips and tricks. Before I dive into it, a couple things. One, this is a presentation I have given before in some form or another at other cons. So if you've been at those and this slide looks familiar to you, you'll see a presentation reminiscent of one you've seen before. But because the panelists often change, there's always a little spice and always something new to learn at these panels. The other thing I was going to mention to you, I conveniently forgot. But I'm going to, if time permitting, at the end of this panel, I'll give you a brief overview of what we've got planned for the DMG revision coming in 2024. And time permitting, if we have some additional time, I've got some D&D Trivial Pursuit questions.
Nice.
That I can ask you, and we can just have a good time. So first of all, how many of you consider yourselves to be experienced DMs? Look at that. Okay. How many of you have not DM'd but are interested in doing so? Okay, a few. This is not a surprise. At Garycon, it tends to be a bit of a reversal from what we see at other cons. We have a lot of experienced DMs at this show. For those of you who are experienced DMs, I hope that you find this, if not enriching, at least validating or reassuring. But I will caveat this by saying these tips and tricks come from primarily my experience as a dungeon master. And to sort of establish my cred at the outset, I have been DMing since I was 10 years old, and I am now 152. So that's a long time. And I was, I guess, in addition to DMing for my own players and whatnot, I guess I'm one of the pioneers of what the kids call active play, with the Acquisitions Inc. games that started up back in 2007, 2008, which were performative D&D, which is very different from the type of D&D I play with my friends at home. But I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. To my right is
Justice Armand. I feel like I'm recording my phone greeting. I'm a senior game designer on the Imaginative Play team with Chris, and
Amanda Hammond. I am also a senior designer in the D&D studio with Justice.
So how did you end up on a D&D DMing panel? So tell us about your DM experience just in a nutshell.
Sure. So I have been playing since I was about 15 in the early 2000s, late 90s, and been DMing since I was about 16, about a year after I started playing. And I grew up in small town Ohio, and anybody who played D&D in that town all knew each other and all sort of rotated in and out of this group. So I got a lot of experience early on being one of about 2 people who actually ran an active game in that town. And this was back in the day when it was very common that everybody homebrewed everything. So we set games in our own little worlds, and it was an ongoing game that actually that particular game lasted all the way through. I was a freelancer in the tabletop industry for other companies and got my first full-time gaming job in tabletop RPGs, moving from Indiana at the time to Seattle, Washington in 2015. That campaign went all the way through like 2016, 2017 when we finally ended it because people lived all the way across the country and nobody could go to the games anymore. But I've been DMing lots and lots and lots of systems. since that whole time, and I have always come back to D&D as the game that I started playing, the game that I fell in love with, and the game that has absolutely changed my life.
Yeah, I was in a 3.5 campaign in college with someone who asked me if I wanted to spend my Friday nights playing a game called Dungeons and Dragons. And I said, isn't that game in the basement with the paper screens? And he's like, sort of. And I said yes, and I fell in love with it. And then about a year later, or a couple years later, I remember walking in downtown Provo, passing a game store where I saw a big poster with King Snur Ironbelly on it of a red book that had come out not that long ago, and that was the 5th edition Player's Handbook. I walked inside, I bought a copy, I talked to some people there, and then I just really wanted to start running games of my own, and I did, and it continued that since, and now it's been about 10 years, and it's been a blast.
Who's the most famous person you've ever had, that you've ever DM'd? Or a person who sort of you thought you'd never be able to DM?
I just ran a game this morning with Vince Vaughn.
That counts.
Paul White, The Big Show, and Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, and various other couple of other screenwriters. So that's not the first time that I've run for them, but probably that is up there. Very recent example.
I'd say those are pretty darn good examples.
I had the pleasure earlier last year of running a game of Faster, Purple Worm, Kill Kill for the D&D Fast channel. That was a lot of fun and really surreal, going down to LA and watching the production people cast mass suggestion in real time. They would say, and here comes a big laugh, and they would point at the crowd, and then the crowd would laugh. It didn't work there, obviously. There you go. But I honestly think that the most exciting people that I've played with and continue to play with are the people on our team that we get to play test with. I have very fond memories of playing in a game with Jeremy, and he, before we ever even played, he stopped and was like, just asked questions like, do you all have any questions of me? Is there anything you want to know about the game? And we just talked about D&D for a bit before we even played, and that's a treasured memory of mine.
Cool.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, next slide, Chris. An experienced Dungeon Master will tell you one of the great joys of Dungeon Mastering is you get to wear many hats. You get to do many things. You're not just building the world, you are telling stories within a world. You are refereeing the rules, keeping everybody kind of playing the same game. You are an actor. You're bringing all sorts of satellite characters and monsters to life in the imaginations of your players. You are a director. You are pushing the story along. You are selectively editing out bits as you go to create a fun, joyful, rollicking experience for everyone at the table. If you've got new players at the game, suddenly you're putting on your teacher's hat and you're telling, you're instructing new players on what is important, what do they need to know at the outset, and guiding them through the experience of this role-playing game. And finally, last but definitely not least, and one of the trickiest and most satisfying parts of being a DM, the role that gives me the most joy and terror. You are an improviser. You are thinking on your feet. You are reacting to situations that come out of left field, right field, center field, and some other field that you don't even know about. And that is part and parcel of the joy of role-playing games. It's a shared storytelling experience, and you have got to go with the flow. And by the way, feel free to jump in at any time to say, "No, Chris, that is wrong," or
I
Chris,
agree.
I agree. Sorry,
It's our roles.
They report to me, so this is going to be
So wise.
Briefly, at various times in the presentation, like right now, I'll interject a little bit of information about what's coming in the DMG in the DMG 2024. One of the things that I wanted to point out here is that we have reorganized the DMG so that the first chapter is all about the basics of the game, and the second chapter is all about how to survive and thrive as a dungeon master. That's a switch from the 2014 book, which basically just threw you into creating your own campaign. Here, we're going to move things around a bit and ease you into it. So the next will be the first of a series of slides where I touch on each of these. Well, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Get
No worries.
you quick.
So world builder, storyteller, referee, actor, director, teacher, improviser. I have one tip for each of these roles. And this is the tip I have decided to put forth for the world building tip, and that is to start small. And what I mean by that is when you're a DM, the urge to create the entire world, the entire multiverse, everything about your setting, all at once can be overwhelming and overpowering. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But your players, once they come into contact with your world, won't see it all right away. And so I would recommend, particularly if you're a new DM, to focus the campaign to start. Start in a hub or at like a town or a tavern and flesh out the environs of that hub. But don't get too far into the greater world, because you don't really know with great assurance necessarily where the story is going to go, where the players want to go. And so I find it's really good advice to start with a local area where you know the immediate action is going to take place. Maybe flesh out some dungeons and other areas around it. See where the campaign is going, what the characters are gravitating toward, and then start to expand out your world, detailing the locations.
That's a great point, Chris. I really like to think of it as the wheel of world building and building outwards, like Chris described, starting with that axle, that core piece that the characters are going to encounter immediately early on, the starting town, the starting inn, the starting tavern, the places that you know that they're going to go. Give them the details and create those things and have those things come to life, but don't necessarily feel pressure to figure out exactly what the name of the blacksmith shop is and who the blacksmith is and the names of all of the farmers and the names of any NPC that they may or may not interact with. Those are things that you can always either just kind of make up and take a note and flesh out later on, or things that you can prepare later down the road when you know that the game session is going to have them come into contact with something that they want details for.
You know, my first DM had like a 14 or 25 page backstory on the world that I read before we played. Well, let's be honest, not before we played. After the first session. And when I started DMing, I thought naturally I should start by deciding, how was the world created? What are the countries here? None of that ever came up in play. Yep. And it just reminds me, how often do you in your everyday life discuss the Big Bang with someone or like the solar system? No, you're like, where do you want to eat this afternoon? What are you doing later? How do you feel about this thing that happened locally? And I think that's how it is in probably your average play.
So in the 2014 DMG, we told you gave you a lot of information about building a campaign and how to sort of kick it off. But we felt that that's not enough. That it's the best way, I think, for DMs to see a campaign is to actually see it. To build a campaign is to have some model to follow, or something to actually look at, like a finished campaign. So what we're doing in the 2024 book is we're putting a campaign setting in it. Woo. And it will be an eminently customizable one, and it will have a poster map that will be in the back of the DMG for that campaign setting. With the information you need to basically build conflicts in that setting, it will also include a hub where the campaign can start, a suggested hub, fully fleshed out with a map of that location as well. So, here's a question for y'all. How much time should be spent preparing for a game session? A, none. B, an hour or two at most. C, as many hours as you can spare. Or D, depends.
D. I would do D, person, or B.
B. Or B.
I'm going to proffer that D is the correct answer here, that it really is up to the individual DM. Because some DMs love prep. It's an activity that can be eminently just perfectly rewarding on its own. And, right?
I love it.
Yes. And if you want to spend 8 hours planning for your next session, knock yourself out.
Oh yeah, baby. It's so good.
And I used to do a lot of prep for the Acquisitions Inc. game. Like I prepped for days, and then I realized that was futile. 5 minutes into the game, it's like, what? Okay. And so it dropped to none.
I learned that early on as well. As an early DM doing a lot of homebrew, I used to really just agonize over being worried that, oh, there's going to be something that they do and I'm not going to have an answer for it and I'm not going to know how to come up with something on the fly, and I would spend all these hours coming up with stuff. And then, like Chris said, we'd get 5 minutes into the session and I realized I'm never going to touch 4 hours worth of the 5 hours of prep that I did. So my general rule of thumb, even when running off of notes, not running a published adventure or anything that's been completely fleshed out, is that I try to never prep longer than the session's actually going to take. I feel like I've kind of failed if I'm not using my time efficiently enough to feel like I'm ready to run the game. If I prep for 5 hours and the game is 4 hours, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another factor too. The length of the session matters. So if you're running an 8-hour session, I can't do those anymore. I prep more for that because you need more material.
I feel the more experienced that you are, the more comfortable you get with jotting down a few notes and having a sense of
Oh, I'm
the
sorry,
way you
Chris.
know
You're a
will
couple
flow.
slides behind. That
Yeah, this is,
that helps.
okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Boom. Sorry, Chris.
No,
Now,
it's-
now I'm all like gun shy. I don't want to like touch it because I already messed it
Slide.
up. There we go.
There we go.
You just need a secret signal.
Yes.
Tap your nose.
Just give me that nod.
Okay, so in case you're curious, this is kind of what my prep looks like. I do for my own benefit, I write up a short little campaign recap. It's like a couple sentences, and I just put it down on the top of a piece of paper. And it's just like, previously the characters were climbing Kelvin's cairn, wading through the deep snow when they found a frozen corpse of an adventurer and were attacked by crag cats. They continued on and they ended the session in front of a cave covered with snow but splattered with blood, like some great battle had been played out there. And from deep within the cave, they saw a pair of gleaming red eyes staring back at them. That's just to remind me of where things ended off, so that I know sort of in my own mind how to begin the session. And it's also a great opportunity for me as I'm writing the recap to remember some things that may have happened earlier in the campaign that might actually have bearing on the session at hand. And so I'll often make a little note about that too. I also make a list, just a quick list of friendlies and foes, so I have all their names at a glance. And sometimes I'll put a little reminder of who they are beside me. Then I have just a short little list, a bulleted list of events and encounters. It's kind of like me thinking about what I think the flow of the adventure might be, or the flow of the session might be. I know it's likely to go off the rails, but I kind of think of it out in beats. And then if I know I'm going to use certain stat blocks, I'll just make sure I'll have those stat blocks at the ready, whether it's on my phone, D&D Beyond, or from a book. I'll just have that present. And then if there is a map I need, of course, I prepare the map, or I gather the map, or I steal the map, or whatever I need to do. Or I draw the map. I don't do that as much anymore. Do you draw a lot of original maps?
Yeah, I like to draw maps. We also have, my wife and I have 0 kids, so we have invested in terrain. It is an investment that I make sure to leverage. Otherwise, it will sit stored forever. So every once in a while, I'll pick up some odd bits and bobs. My prep looks a lot similar, very similar to Chris's. The one thing that I tend to do when I prep is I write down a little checkbox next to each of the characters' names on my my prep sheet, and I make sure to find something in there for each one of them. That way, each one of those players leaves the session going like, I feel like I got the spotlight tonight, or oh, I had this really cool moment that felt like it was just for me. And if I go through a session, even if they derailed everything, and each one of them felt like they got an opportunity to do what they do best, then I know they had fun, and I feel accomplished as a DM.
Yeah. One of the features that we're adding to the 2024 DMG is a suite of handouts that DMs can use to help keep track of all their campaign notes. And these handouts will also be available for free on the D&D Beyond website, so you don't have to tear them out of your book. It's some of them are like planners that can help you keep track of things session to session. Others are things like a settlement tracker, where when you create a new settlement, you can use this tracker to basically flesh out details of the settlement that you don't have to then have to remember later. And numerous other little handouts that we think will be of great assistance to new DMs as well as experienced ones. Next slide, Chris. Thank you. So moving on to the DM as the storyteller, the storytelling tip I'm offering up is talk less, listen more. And I say that because the DM has a lot of work on their plate, right? As a DM, you are taking care of the setup, but your player characters also drive the story. And you can learn a lot about where the campaign should go just by hearing your players talk. And sometimes they will feed you ideas and complications and solutions to puzzles that you yourself never imagined. And it's like, oh yes, I did plan that.
My favorite is when the players come up with an idea that's better than the one that you had for the story.
Yes.
And they go and they put X, Y, and Z together and they come up with, maybe it's this giant conspiracy by this person to do this thing and that thing. And I'm thinking, it wasn't, but it is now, because that's cool.
Also, by listening, you learn a lot about your players and what interests them about your campaign. So if they're spending a lot of time talking to an NPC because they really like the interaction, that gives you information you can use when constructing other NPCs down the road. And so I spend in my home game, which is usually about a 2-hour session on average, I probably am just dead silent for at least half of it. And it's just the players. And sometimes they will make their own conflicts. I mean, like not horrible conflicts like they're hitting each other.
Yeah.
Their characters are just getting into debates about which way to go, how to do something. You know, who is this person on the up and up, or are they trying to deceive us? They get into their own little mini turmoil, and I just sit back and watch. It's great. Next slide, please. So another quick question for y'all. How do I make my players care about my campaign? A, make the campaign about their characters. B, create likable non-player characters and antagonists. C, have the characters' actions come back to haunt them. D, avoid predetermined outcomes.
Yes.
Yes. Trick question. They're all correct. Yes, all of these things are great. Players like it when their characters are the stars of the campaign. They want their characters to matter in the world that you're creating. And they want to know that the world that they're fighting for, or the world that they're acting in, has people in it that they can care about. Because if they don't care about anybody in the world, they won't try to save your world. And many of your campaigns are really about trying to make good in the world. And likable villains. My players love good villains as much as they love their good friends. And they will sometimes go to great lengths to keep a villain they hate alive. Because they want that character to stick around. And then, of course, having characters' actions come back to haunt them is what we all live for.
Yeah.
That's what we as DMs imbibe to give us strength to go on, is this idea that it's the players who are setting themselves up for disaster, and they have to learn that actions have consequences, and that's a delightful thing to sit back and watch a lot of times. Wouldn't you agree? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And avoiding predetermined outcomes is also important because, and I wrote an article about this many years ago, I think back in 2009.
Invisible Railroad?
The Invisible, well done.
DM experience, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. The Invisible Railroad. Players don't like to feel like they're being pushed toward one destination or one outcome. They have to feel like their characters have agency, that they're empowered, that the decisions they make matter. But as many clever DMs know, just giving them free rein can often be disastrous for a campaign. So you kind of set invisible railroads, multiples, and they might all kind of lead back to the same place, but the players don't always know that. They have the agency, but on some level, you are sort of guiding the story toward the intended conclusion. But you as a DM, we as a DM have to be prepared for, oh, this is just not going the way I think it's going. It's going in a different direction. Let's go that way. Next slide. So DM as referee, very, very vital role. Now, the DM is not responsible for being the master of all the rules. It's okay as a DM to rely on players to help you remember rules or reference rules or make sure we're getting the rules right. But always good to keep in mind, particularly in D&D, the rules serve you, not the other way around. Almost every DM I know, including 10-year-old me, made up their own rules and threw rules out when the rules got in the way of the fun. And that is perfectly cool. They're there to help you. If you're stuck and you don't know how to resolve a situation, you can go to the rules, and the rules will help you figure out how to adjudicate that situation. But if you already have a way of doing it, the rules don't matter as much anymore.
Yeah, pacing matters a lot to me in our games. Back when I was in healthcare, the phrase I was taught to say is like, I don't have the answer for you right now, but I'll get it to you next time. And I think it's totally fine, like in the moment of your games, to also be like, well, I'm gonna make this call now, and it might change later. So trust me in this moment, let's get through this. And then let's keep this moment where it is and exciting rather than stopping the game. And that's always worked for me.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that as the Dungeon Master, you are fully empowered to retcon something from a previous session. If you are going through your notes and you realize that you forgot to apply some kind of resistance that a monster had, or you forgot some key plot element that you needed to mention, the existence of an NPC who's going to be important for the characters later on, anything like that you can always feel empowered before the next session to tell your players, hey guys, I'm really sorry, I forgot X, Y, or Z. Can we just retcon this so that it happens so we can move forward with the plot? That's important to know, and especially I personally feel like when something like that swings the pendulum in the player's favor, like you maybe gave the monster too many hit points, or you forgot that it had some kind of vulnerability. Those kinds of things I think are helpful for the players because it sort of helps them towards their goals. I think you should always feel empowered to do that.
One of the things that we're doing in the 2024 books, and this is based on feedback we've received on the 2014 DMG, is the rules in the DMG can be hard to find and hard to reference. So we have gathered all of the stray rules in the DMG into one section of the book, which we're calling the DM's Toolbox, and it has all the rules elements basically alphabetized, so you can find very quickly information about traps, vehicles, poisons, siege weapons, hazards, traps. It's all now sort of alphabetized in one section of the book, rather than sort of being shotgun blasted through the entire thing. Next slide, Chris. Thank you. Another question for you. The Goliath Barbarian wants to ride the hostile owlbear. How should I resolve this? A, don't allow it. No. B, allow a die roll to determine the outcome. C, look up the rules for grappling a creature. Or D, ask your players for suggestions.
D.
I go with D personally.
Missed an E.
I missed one?
You missed an E. All of the above.
All of the above? Did I?
Any of the above.
All of these are great. You are the dungeon master. You know more than your players do about what's going on. Any one of these could be a valid answer depending on the situation. You may not allow the barbarian to jump on the owlbear because the barbarian might be unconscious. or have some other sort of debilitating state that they're dealing with, some condition placed upon them that would prevent them from doing so. And you as the DM can enforce that and say, I'm sorry, right now your barbarian is incapacitated. You cannot jump on the owlbear. You may allow a die roll. It's quite as simple as that. You don't even have to refer to a rule if you don't want to. But if you want to refer to a rule, certainly the grappling rules are probably a good rule to go to. And if you're not sure where to go, I'm betting that one of your players can tell you where to go. And I didn't mean that quite. But you can ask them for suggestions, because you as the DM don't have to internalize all the rules. And sometimes your players will be able to tell you. But you are still the ultimate arbiter, but you can solicit them for advice. All right, so on this slide, one of these is not a cover. Can you identify which of these illustrations has not been on a 5th edition D&D cover?
The middle one.
Yes, you are correct. Anybody recognize this D&D monster? Of course you do. Yes, of course you do.
Skeleton.
Well done.
shoe.
Well done. Yes, a shoe, a magic dagger. So, this is just a bit of fun, a little intermission from talking about DMing, because I'm curious, all of you experienced DMs, if you have given this any thought. Next slide, Chris. We're going to pause here for the gelatinous cube challenge. Would anybody care to share a particularly clever encounter that they built or ran featuring one of D&D's most iconic monsters, the gelatinous cube? Yes.
I had a wizard who relied on his owl familiar to do everything, and they were in the abyss, in the lair of the demon lord of Ooze.
Dweeblex.
Dweeblex, that's it. And they had the owl scouting, and it was down this dark tunnel. And I said, "You see that?" I'm like, flying. And all of a sudden you hear a plop, and it just kind of goes like this, and it dissolves.
Classic use of a gelatinous cube. Get rid of all of your nuisance familiars. In the back? Yeah.
This is not mine. I found it somewhere and I was remembering it, but it was in a dungeon somewhere where it was a stone, and I indicated that the players were going down a hallway, and all they saw was this ghostly, enchanted green armor, glowing armor moving towards them. And the barbarian or someone fighter went to charge to attack the ghost. And it happened to be a gelatinous cube that was sizzling along, filling a 10 by 10 hallway.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd put them inside a frozen dungeon, and when they got to a certain point, they had been using fire to keep themselves warm, and they came across a room that looked like it was just straight ice. And when they walked in, it was frozen gelatinous cubes that once they had gotten there and heated them up, they unthawed them.
I like that.
Oh man, that's really cool. I have not heard that. Yes, and then yes.
There's a pit trap that was about 50 feet deep, and 20 feet down was a gelatinous cube. And so when they fall into it, they get stuck in the gelatinous cube, and if they go through the bottom, they go down to the pit trap.
Is there another one down there?
Yes.
All the way down. Yes, sir.
I had a sultan that wanted cleaner sewers, and so he had hired someone to farm a bunch of these gelatinous cubes, and then they started to breed because they weren't being observed, and it ended up being like you got to clear out these sewers of a ton of gelatinous cubes.
I love that. We had a plan. It was a good plan.
Cats on the island. Get dogs for the cats, you know?
Yes, yes. I think there was somebody with their hand up over here. Maybe not. Okay. Oh, yes.
I had some players who were really fond of long breaks, lots of short rests and things. And they decided to, in a many story vertical dungeon, dig through some of the layers instead of going through stairs and other attractions. But they kept taking really long breaks. And so the wizard at the end of the dungeon adapted his tactics because they gave him lots of time. And so they dug through the floor of one of these things, and a gelatinous cube just falls through and fills the space that they have filled with just themselves, kind of like a Minecraft shaft. style.
Nice.
And now it's
Nasty.
stuck.
That's perfect. So I have two that I particularly like to share. One is the villain who lays out Jello shots, and if the characters accidentally eat them, they realize they're eating like little baby cubes and start to dissolve them from the inside.
That's devious.
And then, yes, and then the second one, and
I'm gonna steal that.
Yes, here's another one I think is worth stealing. The gelatinous cube who in the sewers devoured a guild master of a thieves guild, just like swallowed him up, consumed him. But somehow the guild master's intelligence became inherited by the gelatinous cube, and now you've got the gelatinous cube running a guild of thieves.
That's pretty good.
A sentient gelatinous cube, imbued with the personality of this really nasty villain.
I love it.
Did he wear the face on the front of the cube? The Guildmaster?
I don't know. I think it's just a cube. Yes. All right. So take those ideas. They're yours now. DM as actor. The tip I'm putting forward is that start by understanding the creature's motivation. And if you're in acting school, they probably say this.
What's my motivation?
Right, yes. And sometimes it's so simple. It's like, I want to eat them. And that's all the motivation you need to run a monster. But I think giving some thought ahead of time to what is actually driving this creature. What is its drive? What is it going toward? Putting that in your mind makes it really easy to then set up conflicts with the player characters, or to set up situations where maybe the characters and this creature, whatever it is, are in accord. They have something in common. But understanding what that is very important. Next slide, Chris. How do I play a Galeb Door? First of all, does everybody know what a Galeb Door is? I chose this monster because it's so obscure.
The rock.
Yeah, it's a talking rock. Do I lean into expectations? Use a deep, gravelly voice. Do I defy expectations by giving it, say, the personality of a rock star? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Do I check its intelligence score and its alignment? Or do I think like a rock? Become the rock. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Some of them might seem strange, like how do I think like a rock, become the rock? But when you're role-playing a creature, sometimes it actually helps to sort of adopt the physicality of the creature, like getting all hunched down and crinkled up to resemble, a tight, compact creature. It can be a lot of fun for your players. I mean, they're not going to look at you any more strangely than they would normally. Right? And I think that leaning into expectations while also defying expectations can make a creature extremely memorable. And then if all else fails, if you look at the creature's stat block, it often has little tips in it to help you run or understand how to play the creature. Intelligence is a common one. Alignment is another that you can kind of latch onto. Oh, if it's got chaotic evil alignment, that means it's probably not going to listen to reason and just kind of attack in a fury or behave very badly. And I had a note to myself here about do what the players expect, then add a twist.
Like give it a mustache.
Yes.
That's always
Not what I was thinking, but I'm going to steal that. Next slide. The DM as director. You, the DM, are a player fun tracker. That's one of your jobs. And so keeping the story moving at a good pace is very, very important. But you can save yourself a lot of pain if you let your players help you steer the adventure. But if you realize the fun is over, move on. That's part of the DM's job. Sometimes my player characters will get into a discussion that ultimately I can tell is going to go nowhere. And they will talk and talk and talk and talk, and I'm like, oh God, the adventure. And so sometimes I will just say, and 3 days pass, and you are on the road to the mountain. And they're like, but, and I'm like, no, you're on the road to the mountain. And sometimes the players will push back and they'll say, but I wanted to buy a donkey. And I'll say, yes, you got your donkey. Your donkey is with you now, and you're on the road. Smoothing out. It is a great tip. If you've watched any film, you can see when the movie starts to get a bit long, the editor steps in and moves the action sometime in the future. As a DM, I have found that to be a powerful tool to push the players forward. And it's the players I found actually like it. It sort of snaps them out and gets them in a new situation, and just all of a sudden they're thinking differently about whole new things. And it can be very energizing for your game.
I think a good tip in that direction is focusing on pacing, the way Justice mentioned earlier, and pay attention to the players around the table. And if one or more players starts to get really disengaged, that's a good hint that you might want to do like what Chris mentions, and cut the action on, or move on, or have something happen that gets everybody's attention back at what's going on, rather than having two characters argue for 20 minutes while everybody else checks their phones.
Yeah, and I think looking at directors for inspiration too on how they approach storytelling can be really inspiring. I mean, thinking about your games as a collection of scenes at time can give you a good idea of, oh, is this scene going too long?
Yeah.
Is this something that would have hit the cutting room floor? Like, can we move this along? I think,
Yeah, exactly. Next slide, Chris. Another skill testing question for the room. The game is dragging. How do I speed things along? Jump ahead, skipping events of little consequence. Collapse a string of unimportant events into a montage. Have someone kick down a door. That's the Mickey Spillane solution. Don't know what to do. Have a bad guy kick down the door. Play fast music in the background, like Benny Hill.
Benny Hill, that's very specific.
As dumb as it sounds, playing fast music in the background actually has a profound effect on players and how they behave at the table. You can actually get them to accelerate.
A little Pavlovian.
I'm not suggesting you actually use Benny Hill.
We're not saying that.
Yeah, and jumping ahead is a good way to keep the story moving in a fun direction. That said, if the players are having fun talking to an NPC in town, everybody is engaged, there's no reason to snap them out of that. I don't want to deprive them of something that they're all enjoying, but to your point, Amanda, if one or more of them are starting to look at their phones, well, there you go.
And sometimes that can be an aid for you as a DM, because if the player characters are having a great time and they're spending a lot more time on a plot point or talking to an NPC than you expected, then your prep just extends into the next session. You don't have to do as much because they haven't gone to it yet.
Yes. Next slide, Chris. On the teaching side, and I've taught a great many folks how to play D&D in my lifetime. I have a great story of when I was 12, I went with my uncle on a trip down to Florida because he flew model airplanes. And we were stuck in a campground one night with like no power. And there was a kid, about 8 years old, in the camper beside me. And we had nothing to do except play D&D. And I taught him how to play in the dark with candles in the camper. 30 years later, I met him at a Gen Con. Fully grown up with a family. He had taught at least another 150, 200 people how to play the game through his connections to his clubs that he started up. D&D is a powerful tool. We see that in many ways and shapes and forms. But I have found my number one teaching tip is get them into the game as quickly as possible. They don't need to know what all the ability scores and all the skills and all the things that their character can do right off. Tell them how the D20 works. Rolling high is good, or however it works in whatever game you're playing. Then just get the story going, get them engaged, get them solving puzzles or interacting with the world you've created. And as things come up in play, that's a great time to pause and say, okay, we're entering a combat here. This is how hit points work. Or you want to attack, you've decided you want to attack the guy at the bar rather than say hi to him. You know, your player might be 8 years old. That seems like a perfectly natural and reasonable thing to do. Then you
How'd they
say,
get into the bar?
Right, whatever. It's medieval times, you know. There are 8-year-olds in bars everywhere.
What are you gonna have, kid?
But then you can tell them, okay, we're getting into an attack situation. Let's talk about your attack options and go from there. Having them learn piece by piece is a lot easier than front-loading a lot of the game.
D&D can be very intimidating, right? It's got a lot of rules. I've lost count of the number of times that I've had people come up to me and say, how do I get started? I just don't understand how this book turns into what I'm watching as a stream or what I've seen other friends do. And honestly, my answer is always the same. It's always just play. Just play. And D&D is only as intimidating as you let it be, right? And if you're an experienced player, if you're an experienced DM, sitting there with a new player who doesn't know anything about the system and telling them, don't worry, we'll help you figure it out, is the most powerful tool, because that lets them focus on the imagination and the narrative and the character building and the storytelling. And that's really what D&D is about, right? It's not about which edition you're playing or what the rules are. It's about everybody having fun together and working together to build that narrative.
Yeah, the phrase I say a lot to new players is, tell me what you want to do, and I'll tell you how to do it.
Exactly.
We'll get through it together, right? Like, especially if you see someone who's looking at their character sheet and they look overwhelmed and they're like, well, I think if I have a bonus in this, how can I do this? I'm like, it sounds like you want to try to ride the owlbear. Is that correct? And they go, uh-huh. And I'm like, okay, roll a die and tell me what you got.
Yeah. There we go. One of my players has trouble deciding what their character should do on their turns in combat. How do I get them to play faster? 1, use an egg timer, skipping the player if they aren't fast enough. 2, signal your exasperation by rolling your eyes and sighing loudly. C, suggest 1 or 2 good options. D, make the initiative order visible to your players.
All of the above.
If we're being honest, we have done A and B before.
Play the mini hills.
Yes. I'm going to argue that the first 2 are probably less than ideal options. But it's always nice if your players are confounded to suggest a couple good options. Hey, you've got this cantrip that you can do, or hey, you remember you have a fireball. That's always great. Or 2, it actually helps to make the initiative order visible. Why? Because if the players, a lot of players are sitting around waiting for their turn to come up. If they know their turn is coming, one of the instinctive things that they will do is they will start looking at their character and seeing what they're going to do on their turn. And the only reason they do that is because they know their turn is coming.
Yeah, the thing I've picked up from actual plays like Cast Party is the DM will say, the DM will have initiative order ready for them, invisible, and then will say, it's your turn, you're next, or you're on deck. Like, this is whose turn it is, you're the next player. And they never have an excuse to be like, wait, what am I supposed to do?
Yep.
Like, they always know when it's about to be their turn.
Yep, correct. In the 2024 DMG, we're moving all of these sort of DM tip stuff to the front of the book so that too is not scattered. Because a lot of the actual DM advice is in chapter 8 of the book currently, which is bizarre. I'm responsible for that. I've learned.
Why?
Okay?
Ask Chris why.
I'm growing. And finally, the DM as the improviser. This is actually a tip that Mackenzie, one of our colleagues, gave me. I had a different tip in here before, and she gave me a new one. So I was like, yeah, that's much better. Embrace the notion of the loading wheel. We've all experienced computer glags, where you get the spinning pinwheel of doom, the rainbow-colored pinwheel or whatever it is. The DM sometimes needs that too. If the players confound you in the moment, it's okay in the moment to say, "Give me a minute. Let me think about that." It's like, "Oh, I never thought of that. That's really cool. Give me a second." That might require actually, you know what? We'll take a little break here, and then we'll come back and we'll pick up the game in just a second. And give yourself that minute or that 5 minutes or whatever you need to process. Because it can be hard to think on your feet, and even the most experienced DMs can be confounded from time to time.
Taking advantage of table distractions is also really helpful as far as the loading wheel goes. I've had players do that. They ask, "Can I do
a puppy."
this?" Exactly. Can I pet the puppy? Where's the puppy going? Can I chase the puppy? And I think, oh my gosh, it's just a puppy. I don't know. But then, as people tend to, table talk, and then they'll discuss things. Somebody will say something, ask a question of another character, or they'll be looking at each other's character sheet, or they'll want to show another character something, and I will just let that play out, paying attention to it in the background while I'm flipping furiously through notes to figure out if I actually need to give a reason or give a situation of what's happening with the puppy that the other character is so obsessed with.
Yeah.
And nobody has any idea that I don't know what the heck I'm going to do, but I've taken those 2 or 3 minutes to let those players talk and cover the fact that I'm just kind of scrambling for a moment.
Yeah. Improv is mental gymnastics, and your brain is a processor, and sometimes your processor has loading issues. It's okay to let the loading wheel play out.
In rare instances, especially if we're near the end of the session, I might just call it as a cliffhanger. And especially if it's something very disruptive, because I'd rather the session end on a high note than me try to come up with something and there's only 10 minutes left. It's like, that's a great question for next week. And then everybody's like, oh, and they're so excited for the next time.
Doesn't work 5 minutes into the game.
No, yeah. That's a great question. All right, let's get out of here, y'all.
Next skill testing question, Chris. Sorry.
Actually, one comment on
Oh.
that. One technique I've used, especially if I have experienced DMs at my table playing, is basically clear it with them that like, hey, can I throw to you for an NPC? Like, give me this time to be like, and so, Bill, what is this? What does a shopkeeper look like? Take over while I figure out what's next. And they go into 10 minutes of the shop environment. And again, create more things that maybe you didn't think of that come out of that. But
that's awesome.
Delegating,
Yeah.
it work and D&D works.
Super tip. Super tip. The characters are about to die. How do I avoid a TPK? Fuck them. Let them die. Then, maybe work with them to concoct a plan to bring them back. Or B, have the enemy show mercy and make a tactical error. C, harsh. Stage a timely rescue. Oh, look at that. Paladin order just shows up right in the nick of time. Or divine intervention.
All of them.
All of them are good.
I have used all of them.
Yeah, so have I. I've used all of them. They all work.
Not me.
Your enemies can be fallible, and they do make mistakes, and sometimes it's poetic justice to watch them make a decision that ultimately costs them the battle. And we see it in James Bond movies all the time. Right? The villain could just as easily kill James Bond, but why bother when he can put them on an island with, alligators all around and see how he gets out of that situation. That is a tactical error. Villains
I also
are.
like to have the bad guys find the MacGuffin that they're looking for, that the players don't know they're looking for, and now they're no longer interested in fighting the party. They're like, no, we have the ability to be a lot more powerful, and we're going to go do that, bye.
Yes.
And then the party's like, well, shit.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's a good escalation of expectations.
Yeah. And if they do all die, then it becomes a conversation with the group. Do you guys want to play new characters? Is this a great opportunity for us to start fresh with a new group? Or do you actually like your characters and you'd like to contrive some fanciful way to get them back in the game? There's all sorts of ways to bring characters back in D&D. It's not that hard.
And you might land up owing someone a favor in the process, you
Yes.
know.
Yes.
You're rescued, but
It's Asmodeus.
Right. Yes, Asmodeus will save your bacon, but you're going to have to repay him with something, and that's never good. Next slide. This is the last slide of this presentation before we jump into the quick preview of D&G stuff. This is a summary of kind of the theme of this presentation. A lot of the questions that were framed as multiple choice go to this point, and that is that how you DM is as unique as how you paint or write, and that no two DMs are alike, and that's exactly how it should be. Anybody disagree with that?
I'm curious if I can ask a question. I imagine that there are different kind of persona in matter of DM, no? Categories that DM can be. Like you say, like there are some people that are more propense for improvisation and some other they are much more like mathematical.
Yes,
right?
and some DMs like certain roles better than others. Some don't like being the referee. Some don't like being the world builder. They want to use just a pre-built world. And it varies sometimes by campaign to campaign. A DM may change how they play, how they run the game based on the players that they have. And so even a DM is not etched in stone. DMs can change their style according to the group that they're with. So very briefly, a couple slides here about the Dungeon Master's Guide overview. This is the 2024 revision that we're releasing later this year, and these are very brief. I just wanted to say that this is a piece of art that, one of the pieces of art that we commissioned in the process of developing the new DMG. Is that beholder a villain, or is it the fourth party member? I don't know. Could go either way.
It looks really friendly.
Yes. But the primary goals of revising this book are, we want to make it easier to navigate, we want to make it more useful to the DM in play, and we want to make it more inspiring as a book. That's why we're doing, for the inspiring part anyway, that's why we're adding some bits in about, here is a sample campaign. The adventures chapter now includes sample adventures, so that you can be inspired by those when creating your own. These are all lessons that we've learned in the past 10 years, talking with you, talking with other people in the community, and just our own, feelings of what we can do now that we're going back to these books with a nice budget and time and all the feedback that we've received. So that's really the goals of the new DMG. And Chris, the next slide is a picture of a classic location. Does anybody know where this place? There's a Tomb of Horrors. Thank you. And who created the Tomb of Horrors? Gary Gygax. Yes, the namesake of this wonderful convention. And one of the other things that we're doing in the DMG is we're populating it with a pile